Hello, hi. Do you take an English literature class? And do you hate it? You hate it. You think it's flaky, really fluffy, unreasonably long, confusing, too many words? Because I was literally the exact same. For me, a lot of it was a mental battle. I was like, I refuse to like this subject that's being so rude to me. I am here to help you because I was kind of right there, like just last year, just like almost exactly a year ago. I was like, I hate English class, and I'm not someone who hates classes usually. I mean, I'm someone who's just like, this is boring or too confusing for me to like it. And that's how I felt to English. And then look here, like a year later, in 1 year, I managed to completely like glow up essentially, and I got a 7 on my IB exam. Boom. And I did my oral beforehand, before I had my like little metamorphosis moment. So that means that my actual like essay and my literary interpretation really carried my grade. So I'm here to tell you how I got to a place where not only was I able to do well in class, but I also started to appreciate English, and I kind of an English fiend kind of, because I'm like, wow, I'm buying poetry books and I'm reading like really complicated like classics, and I'm just like, I appreciate it now. So if you want to find out more about that, continue watching this video. It's not even Monday, but it's a Wednesday. For some like background, I guess, you know, I did have like some advantages. Like I strongly disliked English class, or I was strongly disinterested in English class, but I did grow up with 2 English speaking parents, natives, and they were like really intense about grammar, like they're like grammar Nazi types. And my sister took like HL English, and she was an English major and stuff, so there is like a lot of English influence that's in my family. But I really did not like English, let me tell you. I could have taken HL English because of all that. I should have taken HL English because it would have been an easy class, but because it didn't interest me, I was like, actually, no, I can't do that because that's so boring. I can't fathom it, right? So I stick by my decision not to take HL English because that would have put too much pressure on me, because I really did not like English until like the start of my senior year. And even then it was a little bit of a struggle until like halfway through. So yeah, like that's just my background. Like I really just did not understand English, and I did not understand all these interpretations. I didn't understand why it was so hard to read things and like write things, and why like my literary interpretations, like it felt like I was always getting like a B+, and I was like, I poured so much effort like trying to understand this text, and you give me a B+, like, but that's kind of my relationship with English. It was like, I'm doing great, right? Like I'm doing good. I clearly know how to write an essay, and I know kind of how to interpret things, but it's not like a material. And that was my relationship with English, and English's relationship with me. And a really good teacher in my sophomore year, and my junior, senior year, I had a pretty good teacher. It did not matter. After like quarter one, my grades would just always go back to like a B+, or that kind of, not subpar, but that kind of like, it's good. You know, and I always got annoyed because, you know, it seemed so fun in the beginning, but by the time like December, January came, the school year, I was like, I'm so done with this class. Basically, that all changed my junior year summer, and really it was my attitude, like, and it had started before junior year summer, but really that summer was when I kind of processed everything. And I even, and I think mainly it was because I started reading a lot of like fiction, because I was stuck in the hospital for like 2 weeks, and all I had to do was read fiction and nonfiction. So I was really getting back into that like reading vibe. So I do think that reading, not easy fiction books, but like easy to read, modern worded like fiction books, even if it's short, even if it's just, you know, classic YA books, I would just read it, because having a positive feeling towards like books and English is definitely very key. It's because for me, a lot of it was a mental battle. I was like, I refuse to like this subject that's being so rude to me. A big part of it was finding a way to relate to English, and I think this is where a lot of teachers fail and a lot of people don't understand. It's like, why is a book relatable to me? Like, why am I supposed to relate to it if I'm just some like kid? Like, why am I supposed to see Shakespeare and be like, yes, it's this great like analogy for something and the themes are so great? Or like, why am I supposed to read The Great Gatsby and come away with it like having an appreciation for the book? And when you're not like into English yet and you're just going to class and you're just like, this is boring, like how is that going to relate to me, because I live in a modern world, right? So a big part of me having this paradigm shift was relating to English material, to artistic material like poetry and songs and, you know, books and classics, especially, like finding a way to relate to that. And the other part was definitely creation, and I will get on that later. But there are 4 things I did, and I'm just going to list them briefly. Relating to pop culture in your life, watching straightforward basic videos that discuss literary analysis very, you know, bare bones, absorb class, and create something. Those 4 things are really just how I completely changed everything. And you know, number 1 is actually really fun. 1 is relating to your life. And basically, folklore came out in junior year, or before my junior year, like that summer, but I didn't listen to it until October of my junior year, so October of 2020. And then Evermore came out right as I was getting obsessed with it, and I was like, oh my god. But it's a very poetic, wordy album, and it's very many meanings hidden underneath. And you know, in folklore, especially when you first listen to it, you're like, oh, are these all like love songs or like romance songs or like about relationships like that? But actually, a lot of the songs on there that may seem like, you know, a breakup or something, it's actually about, you know, Taylor Swift and Scott Borchetta and stuff, and that whole situation. And you're just like, what? And so watching people analyze the songs and, you know, understanding how different literary literary devices were used by, you know, Taylor Swift to create a more, you know, to create an argument, essentially, to create a vibe. Like, that was so much more valuable than anything my teachers had tried to tell me about poetry and stuff like that. And I would recommend Chats and Reacts, because they do this like 20 minutes per song in-depth analysis and explaining like what their view was, what they thought the song was actually about, and like it was so helpful. I would just binge those videos, and then I started being like, oh hey, I see that in my poetry that we were doing in class, or I see this literary technique here. And especially with like The Great Gatsby and stuff, like Happiness came out, and that's I think that's one of the best songs on Evermore and one of my favorite songs. And that's has a lot of, you know, callings to The Great Gatsby. So when I read it in my senior year, I was like, oh, I love this already, obviously, because it's one of my favorite, it hints, and it has, the symbolism is used in one of my favorite songs ever. So of course I was like, yes. Other examples of how Chats and Reacts and just listening to folklore and stuff and using that type of, even like pop music, but using that type of lyrical music to relate to my life, to poetry and stuff. Like the metaphor in Mirrorball, or the enjambment throughout the whole album, Hoax and the Lakes, which are my 2 favorites. I think I'd say those are my at least top 3 in folklore. And those 2 are highly poetic songs. Like, they're not straightforward at all. And yeah, I just like think that Hoax and the Lakes are just sung poetry. And a lot of Taylor's discography does have that. It's just the most clear in folklore and Evermore. And I would just listen to other artists too, and I'm like, oh, like I see how it's used, and I'm like, oh, like especially like when I started listening to a little bit of Lorde too. So relating music to stuff, material I was learning in English class just really helped kind of modernize it in a way, and like it was something I relate to, and it was something I could draw connections to, like, oh, like, you know, this is connected to this, like enjambment is used to make this effect, and it also makes this effect, and I remember from this. I would say that watching videos on how to structure paper ones were number 2 now. There's this one video I watched, and just watching 1 or 2 videos that just cut and dry explain. Oh, on the relating thing, watch English teacher KP, because she is pretty good, but I just started with Chats and Reacts, and English teacher KP does it from a more English teacher perspective, so maybe I would do that after you've kind of started this desire to understand and like analyze things. I'd start with chats and Reacts first, because they're just more like Swifties. And I think that watching straightforward and simple things just helped it, because it's like sometimes literary analysis is so overwhelming, but when you watch a video that's like, you can even this man even gives like sentence starters and sentence structures, and so you feel like, oh, like it's not really super overwhelming. It's just about me finding a device and finding a quote and finding what these pieces of evidence, like honestly, you're just building a case. And once you start seeing it as not creative arts, because it is like, you know, the creative arts, and it is very like flowy, but actually it's very formulaic in a way. Like you can just strip something down. You can just strip it down to its words and to the, you know, the vibe that it's creating, and definitely that really helped a lot. I also think the third thing, which is just absorb class. I mean, you don't even have to take notes, just listen to hopefully your teacher is good. If your teacher is good, listen to your teacher, because they, like at least for my IB teacher, he was a drama teacher, so his explanations were so like dramatic, and he was so into it because he's a drama teacher, right? And so for me, it was just like listening to him and the way that he was able to like analyze things and create these like sweeping things from things that like people were like questionable about. People were like, oh, maybe this is this, and then he'd take it and he'd be like, yes, this is this. I think just absorbing that in class really helped a lot. So 4 is to create. And this could mean, I mean this in 2 ways. Create is, how do I say this? You know how English teachers are always saying, like, your interpretation is your own, you know, everyone's thoughts are subjective and stuff, and it's a bit of a headache, especially if you already don't like English and find it confusing. You're like, what? Especially because some teachers do actually legitimately mark you down if you don't have like the vanilla strict interpretation or meaning that everyone else had, you know? But interpretation is actually up to you, and it's really scary, but it is up to you. And one of the best moments that I had in English class, and that I connected with my teacher, like, and I don't even think he knows that this affected me that deeply, but we were reading this poem called Child and Insect, and everyone was talking about, you know, how it's about child development, because it's this poem about this boy who crushes, like a butterfly or something? I have it open. No, a grasshopper. It's about this child who crushes a grasshopper, thinks it's dead, and then it comes back to, and then he's like crying, and then it comes back to life. So a lot of people are talking about like child development and betrayal and rage, and I agree with that, but I actually thought that it was about vulnerability in the world and manipulation. And honestly, when I read it, I kept thinking like, you know, all those like red pill people or something, like I feel like, because I was listening to a lot of Abba preach, and I thought that it was like really connected to that vibe of like, you know, how a lot of men think like women trick them and stuff, and you know, these days, like, you know, we tell boys it's okay to cry, it's okay to be emotional, but then in like romantic relationships, if a man is too emotional or something, then the women will be like, oh, I'm not attracted to you anymore. And it's like, I remember thinking about that throughout this poem, because it was like the boy was showing such vulnerability and like raw emotion, and then the grasshopper just left, and it was a complete trick. And just like that feeling of betrayal, I felt was really related to that topic. And you know, I mentioned the part that I thought about, you know, like vulnerability, and a little bit about that whole like men-women dynamic kind of, and my teacher was like, well, if you can find evidence for it, that sounds perfectly reasonable. And I was like, oh, I spent 30 minutes of my class, you know, I wrote out my thesis and I spent 30 minutes debating like, do I have like the balls to like talk about this, because I was so like vulnerable, like. But actually the fact that my teacher allowed me to create my own interpretation and said that if you have the evidence to back that up, it can be about anything. So yeah, my final tip is to create your own interpretation, but also writing my own poetry really helped me understand, like, you know, message and emotion, and you know, why do I use this specific device, and what am I trying to convey? And for me, a lot of my poetry is to create an atmosphere, a vibe, and to convey a story or message or emotion, right? And I think that's most of poetry. I didn't understand that until I got like creative and wrote stuff. And Bloom's taxonomy, which I'll insert here, says that creation is the highest level of learning. So when you create, everything else kind of like goes in, like falls in eventually. And I also started to write my own prose, and I actually started writing fan fiction because it's so easy, because you have kind of a plot, like if you're taking it from like a book, you kind of have a plot, you definitely have characters, and you have dynamics. So really, you can just write anything. about these characters and just let yourself really flow. And I got super interested in that, and just how like pretty I could, like some of the things I wrote were. And once I started becoming obsessed with that, I was sold. I was like, oh, I understand now. And even to this day, like sometimes I'm like, what's the point of this passage? But I feel like it's much easier for me to understand once I started writing it. And I think that's my biggest tip, is to actually write poetry, prose, like even if it's fan fiction, because you don't want to spend the time to come up with all of your own characters and plot and backgrounds and stuff. Like that's fine. Like also, I practiced writing even when I wasn't in English. And so I was writing a history essay, and I was thinking about how to lay out the essay and which words would to use in my thesis to capture, and all the stuff I was going to do, and how I should have the thesis statement, and then I have my evidence, and then I have my like binding words, and that will like make this really strong case. And that's still English. Just all of this stuff is really just being aware of it in your life and appreciating it in your life, and it'll be so much easier. And so you'll actually start to enjoy these things, because I love writing poetry now. I love listening to music and analyzing it and stuff. That's so fun to me now. And yeah, if I hadn't had these 4 realizations, I think they're very unorthodox too. Like no one ever talks about, go into pop culture. Do people always like think that because something is new, it's not deep, or because something is older, it's better? And I agree. Like for example, The Great Gatsby, I really enjoy that. Do you think I would have enjoyed it as much if I didn't know, like, for example, that Taylor Swift loves that book, or that Happiness has so many, like, hints to that book? Like, I probably wouldn't have liked it as much or been so eager to read it. And, Taylor Swift is just a really good example of, pop culture and bringing that and not, like, trying to shun that out of your life. So I hope this will help you, because the grass is greener on the other side for this. It's fun over here. So, peace out.